two questions, one for Matt and one for Sarah. I'll start with Sarah. The place where I see young people misbehaving the most and also being abused by adults is on the buses, normally. So I'm thinking, it's not just children and families department or the Department of Education for that matter. It's your other colleagues in other departments who don't work routinely with children and young people. What can you do to educate them to respect young people a bit more? And Matt, the question for you is that the young people who appear in the media, for whatever reason that they're misbehaving, are probably known to you the most, or your organization the most. And they aren't the young people who are here necessarily. So what are you going to do, hopefully, with working with those young people who are misbehaving, to find out what is it that is causing that, rather than asking, the generic good ones? Because we're kind of preaching to the converted here, which is great, we need to do this. But we also need to work with those young people who are appearing in those adverts that we don't want them to. So there are my two questions. Thank you.
I think this comes back to the things that we were talking about earlier and the points that Andy was making a few minutes ago, which is about how attitudes and about how negative stereotypes affect the way in which you perceive behaviour. So behaviour that may not be aggressive, behaviour that may be, it may not be helpful, it may annoy you a bit, is then immediately perceived as being very aggressive. Now that's not to say there aren't some young people who behave really badly on buses, because there are some young people who behave really badly on buses. But sometimes young people are just a bit noisy because they've come out of school and they've been cooped up all day and they're with their friends. And this is partly about breaking down the attitudes between other people who are travelling on the buses who may perceive that behaviour as being immediately aggressive, and also young people for understanding how their behaviour might affect an older person who perhaps might be a bit frail, who's travelling on the bus to go shopping and just wants to be at home and perhaps lives on their own, doesn't really like a lot of noise. So the intergenerational work that you were doing, I think, is hugely, hugely important. Because if you're an older person and you know lots of young people locally, immediately you feel less frightened when you bump into some young people, because actually you look like the nice lad who I had a long chat with yesterday, and the behaviour is just much more familiar. And similarly, if you're a young person and you have a relationship with an older person who's not your gran, who's not your aunt, who's not a relative, you kind of understand a bit more that you might just not be able to cope with the noise. And those things are really important. I don't think it's not about legislation, it's not about the police, sometimes it's about the police being involved, but mostly it's not really about that. It's about people being respectful of one another's needs and understanding where they're coming from. It's basic human behaviour that we need to try and facilitate more of.
Thank you, Sarah. Matt, your question was, how are you working with those young people who have been involved with crime and not basically just preaching to the converted?
Okay, I just want to spend 10 seconds on the last point just to support what Sarah said. Why are we policing transport? Per million passengers each day who use buses, tubes, etc., how many are victims of reported crime? If 1 million people use a bus or a tube or a train, how many reported crime? 3 people. 3 in 1 million. We're policing confidence and perception. That's why we're in there, because people are feeling unsafe. That's why the Commissioner is saying, that's why we need to, that's why we have the safer transport teams. It's just an interesting point on that. What am I going to do about, let's be simple about it, sorting out the bad people when they go wrong? I've got a strong view on this. Some people will see it as a bit different, a bit draconian at times possibly, but we need to have a rethink as to where we are. My business is when something goes wrong, that's when I step in. That's what my police officers there. We are there to enforce the law. All these problems with that young person that gets to this stage, when I get the call and my officers go and speak to that person, it starts here in the family. It then goes on to primary, secondary education, society. By the time all those things go wrong here, that's when I intervene. So what am I going to do to that young person that comes to my attention here? I put a challenge up that what are the other people going to do to address that issue? And it starts with the family. We can decide criminality as early as 5. If you've got a young boy, young man going out in the streets, starts to take a knife out, where's the family intervention to check that? Because that 5-year-old, if that boy is, or girl's 14, 12, 13, 14, and that 5-year-old sees that, oh, that's the norm. oh, it's okay to do that. Where's the change from family? Where's the change from education? You know, we've got some great support from all our head teachers in Brent to, you know, to utilise street surcharges, because kids feel safe when they're in the schools, and we're looking at that area of business. By the time it comes here, it's too late, because somebody's going to get a criminal record, which means they can't travel, they can't get a job, and it's what comes down further down the line. And it's the mission creep of our involvement in that, and that's what we need to look at. But where I can, we work with the local authority very closely. Local authority, we've got local community safety units, we do drug action teams, alcohol abuse, all the services are there. And my issue is how I intervene, because young people's lives are getting ruined on the small number of people that we're talking about. And that's how I get involved in that area of business. But I'm here to do the hard stuff at the bottom end, the back end of the line, and enforce it to make the 99% of people feel safe.
Councillor Shire requested a quick 30 seconds just to react to that. So.
Yeah, just quickly, thanks Kishan, just because this is something I feel passionately about too, Matt, and I do agree with you, we should be looking at this from another perspective other than crisis management when it does get to that stage, and we are looking at ways of supporting early intervention in the council from a more community-based approach. So rather than the police being the point of contact that these young people have with the community, we're looking at different, maybe less confrontational ways so that they can contact with the community, maybe sharing information between schools, local councillors and social services, just you know, opening up information to local representatives so we have a better idea of where these kids are, and maybe we can provide support to their families on a variety of issues. So yeah, I agree, more support for early intervention.